Welcome everybody. Tad Hargrave here from Marketing for Hippies here with Laura Oldanie. So Laura was referred to me by Rebecca Van Dam, who's been helping me with my social media. And Laura came across Rebecca through an interview I did with Rebecca on YouTube. And so full circle, here we are back again. And so what Laura does is, to put it in simplistic terms, kind of work on personal finance and where that meets permaculture. And so I'll look at, today's topic is regenerative wealth building. And we were just talking a bit before we hit record, and I was loving what you were saying. There's the old Nigerian proverb that says that the safest place to store your excess grain is in the belly of your neighbor. And that, community is such a critical part of wealth and often ignored. And as you were saying before we began, even the sustainable investing stuff we see, and I've got lots of colleagues who do it. Green ethical funds, it puts you in the stock market, and so you're all that volatility is pending. And it's, I don't know if you know Michael Schumann's work. He does a lot of stuff around local economics, but yeah, he it's one of this questions I remember him lifting up. It's like, why isn't there a local stock market? Like, why can't you invest in your own local businesses? Why is it so easy to invest in some company on the other side of the planet, and it's so hard to invest in the places, projects that we live so close to? So anyways, I'm so thrilled to have you here. But maybe before we dive in too much, we should define terms a bit. What do you mean by this word regenerative, and why does it matter?
Okay, well, and Tad, I wasn't sure how this was going to flow today, so I have a slide presentation ready, if that works. And in that slide presentation, I include what I mean by regenerative. And I actually have, I think in this presentation, I have a picture of one of Michael Schumann's books because I'm very much a fan. In fact, I'm one of the case studies mentioned in his latest book.
What do you know? Okay, well, small world. I've made you co-host, so just take it away, and I'll maybe interject from time to time, but basically over to you.
All right, very good. Let's see. Okay, and go into the, okay, so yes, regenerative wealth building. So Tad, you already gave a brief introduction. I'll just say a little bit more about how I came to start thinking about this, because it was really about 15 years ago when several factors all collided in my life. One of them being permaculture, another thing being finding Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek book. At this time I was working for a nonprofit, a think tank in Washington, D.C. on education projects. I have a background in international studies and diplomacy. And so I had just discovered those two things. And then Vicki Robbins' Your Money or Your Life book has been very influential, and the FIRE community, this financial independence, retire early community. And I really liked this idea of, designing my life outside of our harmful extractive capitalist model to be more on my own terms. But all the examples I was finding about financial independence, primarily had you building wealth through investing in the stock market or real estate. And the stock market in particular just was not of interest to me. Even the socially responsible funds were keeping me invested in companies so that had practices and products that are not in line with my values. So when I got to my permaculture design course, I really paid attention to the economics and finance section. What I wanted to know from my permaculture design instructor was, do you have health insurance? What does health insurance look like in the permaculture space when you step out of our traditional economy? And so that's really what sent me down this rabbit hole of thinking this way. And so I went on to create rich and resilient living, to share what I'm finding and starting to create around this alternative, more resilient view of way of building wealth. And so just for the disclaimers, we're going to talk a little bit about money today, but I am not a financial advisor or an economist. I've already mentioned, my background. I was a Peace Corps volunteer and not in economics. So just bear that in mind. So, be very thoughtful in the decisions you make regarding all of this. And then a few preliminaries. We're talking about wealth, but by no means I'm making this presentation about hoarding wealth. It's what I want to get people to, especially people who would be in Tad's audience and many of us in the alternative space, is to step up to wealth, to a place of enough, to get comfortable with money, because so often we view it as negative and we back away from it. But I'm hoping you'll come away from this presentation sensing the positive regenerative ways we can use it to bring about the change we want to see in the world. And if you're still uncomfortable thinking about building wealth for yourself, think about it as a tool that you can use with your community. You can build wealth with and for your community. So a couple thoughts to get us started. And I wasn't sure, since this is my first time interacting with Tad and his membership directly, I wasn't sure if there would be people on this call, but I did include a discussion question, but that doesn't mean you can't pause or take a minute to think about this question yourself. What does a wealthy life look like to you? And when most people think about this question, the things that most often come to mind aren't the big house, the fast car, the fancy clothes. A wealthy life often just looks like time freedom, space, time to be outside, time to be with your family, having the ability to make the decisions about how you use your time without having to worry about money and having enough money. And so I think it's really good to start this conversation by just honing in on the fact that wealthy life, what it looks like for you, because it may not be what you might initially think of if you didn't take the time to ponder it a little more deeply. So what does regenerative mean? There was that question that launched us into this slideshow. For many of us in tending towards the anti-capitalist side, we may have heard about regenerative through the practice of regenerative agriculture. That's getting a lot of talk and gaining in popularity. And unfortunately, it's gaining in popularity so much that regenerative agriculture is also being greenwashed. So we have to be mindful when we hear that term as well. But what does it mean? And what am I talking about when I use it in terms of wealth? So as most of people in Tad's audience probably already sense, our current economy is super extractive. It's just sucking up and extracting as much value and depleting whatever it can in its path to create that value. And because we have depleted things so much, even sustainable is no longer enough, because sustainable is just that. It's sustaining where we're at. We need to go beyond just sustaining. If you look at that picture on the left, that's some serious erosion. We don't want to just sustain that. We want to improve the soil. We want to come up with systems and ways to hold the water on the soil, to hold the soil on the property. And so this is this idea that sustainable is good, and I still use the word myself because people recognize it, but with all of the extraction and depletion we've experienced, it's really important that we go beyond regenerative to restore and rejuvenate everything that's been depleted, and that is people and planet. So on the right side, you see an example of a permaculture garden in Seattle, where they're doing much more to be thoughtful about holding the water on the soil, on the property, and even the soil on the property. And you can see how healthy those plants look. So when I'm talking about regenerative, I'm talking about it from this idea, again, that we want to heal and restore and rejuvenate with when we're building wealth and with the wealth we're building, or in the ways we're building wealth. So how can we so yes, this point, we can apply this regenerative thinking to our efforts to build financial resilience. And when I talk about financial security and financial stability, a lot of times instead, I will say financial resilience. I think with what is happening in our world, resilience is so important. And for me, when I say financial resilience, it involves so much more than just the money. As we talked about a little bit at the beginning, the community aspect, all of these other forms of wealth, and we're going to go into a little bit of them. We'll cover a little bit about that later. But this is this idea of we want to strive for financial resilience. So often, Tad, I've heard you refer to permaculture a number of times. So I'm guessing that, there'll be some people quite knowledgeable about permaculture watching this, or even regenerative things. But for so often, when we look at our gardens, when we look at our landscapes, it's so easy for us to presume the potential for abundance. We think, oh yes, we can take the seeds, we can take the trees, the seedlings, and go plant them. And we're very optimistic about the abundance that awaits us. And it's not a mentality of scarcity. But you take the same people and you get them thinking about money and financial freedom, and all of a sudden it reverses to this scarcity mindset. They don't keep that same faith in the potential for abundance around money that they do in their landscapes often. Oops, sorry, I went back. So I want to show you that there are regenerative ways to cultivate, again, what I call true wealth, which is beyond just money, because I want us to not feel conflicted about achieving financial resilience, because it can be really complicated to navigate all of this in our late stage capitalism reality, but we can still do it. So again, I'm going to reference permaculture a little bit in this presentation, but not so much that people who are not steeped in permaculture won't understand it. But for those who do know permaculture, I just want to make the case that in permaculture, there's a flower that has 7 petals. So many people think permaculture is only about gardening and our landscapes, and it's not. It's this beautiful regenerative design tool that can be applied to all aspects of our lives, and including finance and economics. And so, as I said, when I got to permaculture, that was the petal that really intrigued me. And if we look at the 3 ethics that guide permaculture, earth care, people care, and fair share, we see that that 3rd ethic is steeped in this regenerative wealth building. So it is there in permaculture and in many regenerative practices. So let's talk about how we can use regenerative principles to design a life of true wealth for ourselves. So again, these are the 12 most well-known permaculture principles, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to cherry pick a few to highlight in this presentation and then apply them to building wealth and finance. And I just want to note that we looked at those 3 ethics: people care, fair share, and earth care. And those are the 3 most well-known ethics, but I've lately heard a group of people talking about a 4th ethic, the transition ethic, because we are bridging this very extractive, harmful economy. That's where we're primarily based. And we're trying to get to and build and get to this more regenerative, life-affirming economy. So there's going to be, some work in this old economy still, as we're trying to create and get to the new economy. So a permaculture principle that we can look at and think about in terms of wealth building is observe and interact. So this means we want to pay attention to our money. We want to be cognizant of how it's flowing into our lives, how it's flowing through our lives, and where it's going when it goes out of our lives, and how is it going out of our lives. We want to get mindful and observe that money and interact with it, and not just write it off as a negative bad thing because it's money. And I have a feeling, people watching this, you're entrepreneurs and you're thinking a lot about this in your business, but you can also be cognizant of this with your personal spending and your personal finances as well. So that's things like tracking your income and being very cognizant of how much you're making, what are the sources of your income. I'm going to hit on regenerative livelihood a little later, but are you earning money in ways that align with your values? Is the money that's coming into your life, do you feel good about where it's coming from and what you're doing to earn it? Track your expenses. So when your money is leaving your possession, where is it going? Is it supporting what you want it to support? Is it taking you where you want to go? And there are lots of tools to help you track your income, track your expenses. You can, use paper and pencil if you're old school like me. There are all kinds of online tools. So it's not difficult other than developing the habit of tracking your income and expenses. And I talked a little bit about enough earlier. I just want to reiterate that again. This is about getting us to that point of enough in our wealth building journey, so that when we come over that edge where we're getting towards clutter, complexity, and hassle, we're going to be redistributing that excess in ways that are regenerating our community. They're regenerating the people in our lives, our planet. All right. So in personal finance, especially in the financial independence, retire early space, I often hear people talk about lifestyle inflation and hedonic adaptation. And these are two ways that when we start letting these into our lives, that we're not observing and interacting with our finances as much, we tend to spend a lot more than we may actually need to. And lifestyle inflation is this idea of, if you get a raise, if you're already happy with your quality of life and your living standard, and then you get a raise, but you go out even though you don't need a new car and you buy a new car, you're inflating your lifestyle. Or maybe you go out and get a new wardrobe that you don't necessarily need. So just to be cognizant of lifestyle inflation, because this is a way, if we're trying to gain control of our life, really honing in on lifestyle inflation and not letting that happen can be very helpful. Hedonic adaptation is similar, but it's this idea of, once you go out and buy that new car, now that new car is kind of the low bar. You're adapting to it. And so if you have to go back down to a car that's maybe not as nice, it feels like a downgrade. And so we can constantly experience this hedonic adaptation, which there's a lot of expense that comes with hedonic adaptation, because mostly the nicer things often tend to cost more. So again, these are just things to be mindful of as we're observing and interacting with our money. So again, the more intentional you get with money, the less of it you're going to leak out and let it get to the elements of capitalism that you don't like, because I'm suspecting people on this call feel very similarly that we don't want to support these negative elements of capitalism. And instead, though, there are many wonderful things we can do to invest in our own lives and our communities with that money. So I encourage you to look at your spending, again, like I said, and just see, is your personal and your business spending, is it in line with your values? Is it bringing you to the lifestyle goals you want? We looked at that at the very beginning. I encouraged you to think about, what does a wealthy life look like to you? Is your spending taking you towards that wealthy life vision, or is it taking you away from it? So these are things we can all take time to think about when we have a chance. Another permaculture principle is obtain a yield. And for me, this is the one that most immediately applies to money and wealth. And so for that, we want to spend less than we earn. And so we can look at this and break it down in two ways. One is to spend less. And we can do that in, again, I'm coming very much from the permaculture sustainability space. So when I think about reducing, spending less, there's a lot of frugality, and that frugality is very much based in sustainable ways of living. And so my dear friend Jenny Nazak wrote a book called Deep Green that is all about her efforts to minimize her footprint and maximize her health, wealth, and happiness. And she lives over in Daytona Beach and does not own a car, gets around on her bike, supports her local businesses. She was my inspiration. I am now here in the Florida summer, second summer, not using my air conditioning. I have an ice pack between my legs right now to help keep me cool with the fans on. And I'm not suggesting everyone do that, but these are just things that are important to me. And so, there's tremendous savings in not running my air conditioner in Florida in the summer. And it keeps my money away from Duke Energy, which is a company I cannot stand. I ride my bike a lot. My boyfriend and I intentionally chose to live in a small town called Gulfport that's just out of St. Pete here in Florida. It's a very bikeable beach town. It feels like old Key West. So it's, it's a very easy lifestyle place to live, to ride a bike a lot. That shower curtain rod is one of my favorite, most often shared stories. When I bought this house, I pulled out the old shower setup that was there, a glass sliding door, and I needed a new shower curtain rod. And it was something I didn't want to go to a store and spend $16 on a metal or plastic rod, just buy something new that I knew eventually was going to end up in the landfill. And I tried looking at garage sales and thrift stores, and I wasn't finding anything. And then one day I looked out my window and I have this patch of lovely, slender bamboo in my yard. And I thought, hot damn, there's an endless renewable source of shower curtain rods right here in my yard that's invasive. It needs to be cut frequently. So, and it's a beautiful piece of nature in my bathroom that I like so much more than anything else that I could have bought in a store. So, reducing my footprint, being sustainable, just opening, I think one of the things about capitalism and just our economy is it wants us to think we have to go out and buy things. And part of it is we get sucked in, we need money to afford our lives, but then we don't slow down to give ourselves the chance to be creative and come up with our own solutions and recognize the wealth and resources that are already right there in our lives. And so that's a big part of what I'm trying to do more of and encourage other people to do. And so this plant on the bottom left, this is purslane. I don't know if that grows in Canada or where you are, but it grows in many parts of the US. And it's mostly a weed. That's what people think it's a weed, and they spray Roundup on it and chemicals. It's full of vitamin E. It's so healthy. It's wonderful. It can be cooked like asparagus. It grows up through the cracks. But most people just think, oh, it's a weed I have to do battle with. And yet it's the super healthy food source. So if we just shift our thinking, there's so much more wealth accessible to us. Now, is purslane going to pay my rent? Not necessarily, but it's just this exercise, this muscle you can build in thinking about things differently. I happen to live in a town with one of the most active time banks in the country and possibly the world. So if you're not familiar with time banking is a bank. It's a local bank where the currency is time, not money. And all of the exchanges are logged in the software. And so it's not an exchange where I exchange directly with someone. I just create an exchange with someone. It gets logged in the software, and then I earn hours, and I can go use them with someone else. And so, for example, when I bought my house, it came with a lawnmower. But I ended up mulching most of my yard. So my friend needed a lawnmower and she's in the time bank. So my lawnmower stays at her house, and every time she uses it, she gives me a time bank credit. When I needed pictures for social media, I had someone who likes photography in the time bank take pictures for me, and I gave them time bank credits for it. We even have a youth time bank, so the youth are interacting, and we can have exchanges with the youth too. I had one of the young people was learning to do tarot readings or something like that, and I had her give me a reading. So, and then they have this time credit they can use. And Simbi is an online time bank that I believe people from all over the world can use. So it's not going to be an actual exchange of physical goods, but there are people offering all kinds of services, accounting, editing. And so it's a free way to exchange services that exists. But yes, as I said, it's frugality and sustainability is one part of it, but that can only take us so far in building wealth. So then the other side of permaculture, of obtain a yield, is to earn more. And this is, again, I already mentioned a little bit, regenerative right livelihood. So how are we going to earn more? Are we going to earn it in ways that are aligned with our values? And these are some tools that can help us. And Tad, I did not include you here, but I think even though it's not necessarily a way you bill yourself, I think you're a great tool for regenerative minded entrepreneurs, a great resource. So Karen Olson runs Regenerapreneurs, that first one on the left, and she's very all about supporting people as they create a regenerative right livelihood. Heather Jo Flores, who wrote the book Eat Your Lawn, or no, Food Not Lawns, she's now the force behind Permaculture Women. She has a free or pay what you want course called Find Your Eco Niche that can help people create, decide what their eco business might look like. I think the book Drawdown, if you're familiar with the book Drawdown, it's 100 Solutions to Reverse Global Warming, is a great resource. It's not going to tell you how to start a business, but if you looked at those 100 most effective solutions and just thought about how to start a business or get a job with any of the companies doing that, I think that would be a great way to identify a regenerative right livelihood. And then Side Hustle School is a podcast. It's not focused on regenerative right livelihood, but I like it because it's short snippets of entrepreneur stories or side hustle stories. And I just think we can learn from different ideas about and tweak them and think about how we might apply them in our own lives. A little more on earning more. I think, getting to that higher level 10x thinking can be very helpful as we're trying to build wealth.
What is that?
I'm sorry?
What is 10x thinking? And what?
Yes, okay, let me just take a drink of water. It's this idea of, in some ways, like if you're going to do something, also thinking about, going bigger. We tend to often go small. And I am often guilty of this, but giving your chance to think about going bigger as well. And would it take that much more work? And there are articles on this. I can try and find some, Tad, to share with your membership, but that concept of giving yourself the chance to think bigger, and is that an option for you? The 80-20 rule, probably many of you are already familiar with. It's that idea of paying attention to where are you getting most of your results. Most of our results, come from 20% of our activity. And so getting clear on what those are and really honing in and focusing on those. And then for people who are in a position, either you have a business and you're negotiating contracts, or if you are working for someone, this idea of, developing your negotiating skills can be very helpful. And so I just mentioned those as options as well. Again, a little more to the idea of starting to just look at the resources around you a little differently to earn more money. The picture on the left is my neighbor across the street, and she has a back patio. And so we live in Florida, so the weather, it's covered. So in the summer, it's, it's relatively cool under there because it's shady, and we can be outside all year round. And my friend Laura, my neighbor Laura Shepard, is a musician. So she just started her own little backyard variety show that she hosts every other Sunday in her backyard. And she invites, all kinds of people from the community, artists, the mayor has been on her show. She's got Patreon supporters. I've been a guest on her show. A friend of mine is going to be on her next show, and it's something that's really fun. She's got that garage door behind her. She just used chalk. It's all her character. So again, just thinking about what resources do you have and can you use them a little differently? And then, oops, sorry, I didn't. Then the other one is, so my boyfriend, that's my boyfriend in this yoga picture facing the class. He took his yoga training and needed to teach, I think, 10 hours worth of class to finalize his certificate. And he knew he wasn't going to be able to teach at any of the studios around us. So I mentioned we live near the beach. So he just started setting himself up on the beach and announcing it on Facebook that he was teaching a class. And that was 8 years ago. And now he's probably one of the most popular yoga instructors in our area. And he still sets up on the beach. The mayor's wife has been to the class. The city, I think supports it quite a bit because they know that he teaches Sunday mornings and Friday mornings. And after yoga, people go to brunch. And so it's been a really positive thing. He was even named Citizen of the Year by our local newspaper this past year. He also he's a beekeeper and he has a backyard plant nursery, and all those three businesses are very synergistic. His yoga students buy his honey or they buy plants from him, and then vice versa. When they come to buy the honey, then they hear about his yoga. And so he just didn't let that fact that he didn't have a studio stop him. He found something else. Okay, oops. All right. And still, again, we're still talking about obtaining a yield. So we're talking about this from a regenerative perspective, and wealthy people think in terms of assets and investments. And we often think of this as something extractive, and often they are, but they can be regenerative assets and investments. So that picture on the left is a wax press. And this is something my boyfriend bought to help him be able to press more honey out of the wax. And that investment in that wax press paid itself off in one season of honey harvest. So anything else he makes from this additional honey is pure profit for him because he invested in that press, and it's helping him get more honey out of the wax. The middle picture is a local organic farm that hosted a class where people could come and learn to build those earthen ovens, that one that you see. Then so they hosted the class, people paid to come build the oven. They had to do a little more work on that effort. And now our area's gourmet pizza maker goes out there at the weekends and makes pizza and sells pizza out there. And they knew that investing in that oven and being able to get that gourmet pizza maker out there would be a real boon to the farm. And skills are such an overlooked investment. Just learning how to fix cars or even make repairs in your home and jewelry making, whatever the skills are that apply to what you're doing, because they can not only earn you money, but they can also save you money as well. So if the more we can practice and get in the habit of asking ourselves, how can I obtain a yield from this? The better we'll get at answering that question. And I put that word of caution here because I'm not looking for us to look at everything in our life as how can I suck something out of that and get value or extract more. But I do think we overlook a lot. And I think this is an opportunity for us to get much more creative and resourceful, which I think is so important in this time of climate change and the challenges that await us. And so now a little bit more about tapping non-monetary wealth. I talk a lot about meeting our needs without money. And that's not so much because, it's not because I think money is bad, but again, I think the more we can meet our needs without money and recognize other forms of capital, the more we can hold on to our financial capital for when we need it. And Tad, I don't know if you or anyone else who's joined us now is familiar with the 8 forms of capital. So this is something that I learned about through permaculture, although this idea is not original to permaculture. But we really are surrounded by all of these different forms of capital. And so what we know primarily is and operate in as a society is financial capital, but that's just one form of capital. We'll just go around this graphic quickly clockwise. But the next one is experiential capital, which we saw with the female mechanic, those skills. You know, when we volunteer in the garden, if we know how to change our own bike tire, or, you know, do any kind of home repairs, if you are good at public speaking, these are all examples of experiential capital, and these have tremendous value. Spiritual capital, that could be your religious faith, but it could also be your meditation practice or your yoga practice. So that's another form of capital. Social capital, that's your neighbors, your community, your family, friends. It's the networking groups you're part of. It's the capital you build when you come into the membership. It's hub marketing, as Tad talks about. It's huge. And if you think about what happens when we have a tornado or a storm or some kind of weather event afterwards where the power goes out, that's when you get to know your neighbors and you come together and you share a generator, or you know, you share dried ice. You finally get to meet your neighbors often after that, and you build that social capital. It's when you lose your job, but then can put it out on Facebook that you need a job, or let your friends know, and someone's able to hook you up with a job opening. Cultural capital is our shared, it's our music, our films, our history, our food. Those are examples of cultural capital. Intellectual capital is our knowledge, our innovation. It's what we learn when we read books. It's, you know, what we learn when we go to school. So that's our intellectual capital. Material capital, those are the phones or computers we're using right now, the buildings we live in, our cars, it's my bicycle. Those are all kinds of tangible material forms of capital. And then living capital, those are our parks, lakes, the mango tree in my neighbor Laura's yard that I love to go harvest mangoes from right now, our gardens, those are living forms of capital. And so if we think about it, we only want financial capital because financial capital is our gateway to these other forms of capital and the things we really want in our life. So I like to get people to think about, okay, how might I just go bypass financial capital and get directly to the form of capital that I actually want? So you can inventory those, go back and look at those 8 forms of capital. There's an article on it. You can just Google search 8 forms of capital, and you can give yourself the exercise of just thinking about each of those forms of capital and what are examples in your life of those forms of capital. And then are there ways that you can access those forms of capital that you don't have without spending money, or can you use those forms of capital that you do have to earn more money if you need them? So it's a great tool for just getting a sense of where you are, how resilient you are. Is there more you can be doing with the forms of capital in your life? This exercise, a similar exercise, I've used it in low-income youth communities because it really helps you see that you're richer than you think. And it's not about being rich in all of the forms of capital. It's just getting a sense of where are you? And then you can think about, well, who else in my life is rich in these other forms of capital? How do I build community and be cognizant of, you know, having access to these forms of capital when I need them? So, and then with when we have these forms of capital and we are more cognizant of them, then we can spend less, like I've said, because we can tap them directly and we can earn more from them. Like, this is my boyfriend's mulberry tree. So I can just go pick the mulberries instead of having to go to the store and buy berries. And one more permaculture principle, catch and store energy. So this is where we're really ramping it up. You know, we've gotten beyond the point of, you know, worrying about paying off debt or, you know, getting a basic financial foundation in place. And we're trying to start investing and create some FU money, in the sense of you're not beholden to a boss or an employer or anyone, you know, where you don't want to be because of money. And again, I just want to reiterate, we want to think about this in regenerative ways. So I love this quote from the Clean Money Revolution. Can we invest like earthworms, making long-term contributions to life cycles? That's what we want to be doing when we're building regenerative wealth. So if we talk about levels of regenerative investing, this is something that Ethan Rowland, who was one of the people that co-authored that first article in Permaculture on the 8 forms of capital, outlined. What we operate right now is an economy that extracts value. So we're depleting capacity when we do that. That's the conventional stocks and bonds you can invest in. When you get to the socially responsible investing, some of you may have heard of, then you're at least reducing harm. When we get up to thinking about B Corps and right livelihood, we're getting into doing good. And then when we get to regenerative, we're evolving capacity and getting, you know, like I said, we're restoring and rejuvenating things with the investments that we're making. And so we want to catch and store our financial capital in ways that also redistribute that surplus. So this is in permaculture, that third principle of fair share. So there are investments outside of the stock market. I've spent a good bit of time. So what I've done personally is, here in the US, we have something called a self-directed IRA. And it allows you to make investments in many things outside of the stock market. It's a very unrestricted way to invest. And so I've moved most of my money out of my employer-based retirement account that was only in the stock market into a self-directed IRA. And I've put a lot of time and effort into finding regenerative investing opportunities that are open to me as a non-wealthy investor. And so one of the investments that's out there that I learned about is this East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. It's in Oakland, California, and it's in a building where they're, well, it's cooperative. And I think primarily right now they have one building, but I think they're working on more, where the people who are buying, I think they're like condos in the building or units, have ownership, but they also take outside investment as well, but it's at a very, you know, slower patient capital rate of return. And so this is something that's much more in line with my values. The Boston Ujima project is something, as it says, it's in Boston, and it's a great project that's really trying to democratize investing, because it's bringing together people who live in a lower income neighborhood of Boston and giving them a lot of voice in what's going on. And they have the opportunity to be investors themselves for small amounts of money, but it's also bringing in more affluent investors and philanthropic money. And it's the philanthropic money that takes the risk for the most part. So if there was an economic hit, the risk is much lower for those lower income residents that are making the investments as well. So we can really shift our thinking about how we set up these investing opportunities to make them much more regenerative. And Tad, you mentioned earlier, Michael Schumann, his latest book is called Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. And yes, this is such a big question for me. Why is it easier for me to invest in Wall Street than it is in Main Street? And I bought 10 copies of this book And I went around and I gifted them to the head of our Chamber of Commerce, the head of economic development here, and several other key leaders in my community. And now it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of community lifting, but the conversation has started. And there are a number of case studies in this book, and I'm actually one of the case studies in this book about how the investments I've made in my local community. The biggest investment I've made to date is I split an ownership share with my boyfriend of our leading premier permaculture farm in our area. And so, you know, that farm where I showed the picture of where they put the cob oven in, I was one of many people in the community who stepped up and lent money to a friend of ours who stepped up to save that farm about 3 years ago when we were at risk of losing it. And that money has been paid back in full. So if we have these conversations with each other, if we put in the time and effort, we can come up with these regenerative ways to invest in our own communities, to repair and improve our own communities. We all want to live in vibrant communities, and then we go shopping and send our money off to Wall Street and, you know, all these chain stores. You can also invest in your own business. And again, you could have a marketing for hippies investment club. You could be investing in each other, you know, coming up with ways like the lending circles that women have done for many years in lower income countries. So again, I just want to reiterate, the more that we who are already thinking this way step up to money and earn money through these regenerative practices, the more we can divert it from that harmful extractive economy and put it into more regenerative practices. And you look at a forest and you see there's so much richness inherent in nature. You know, it just gets richer. There's so much biodiversity. We can do that in a positive way as well. So if you're struggling with the basics on personal finance and want to find some resources that are less off-putting, these are some that I like to share. More Money is actually based in Canada. I'm not sure how many people in Tad's audience are in Canada, but that's a website in Canada. Now, I'm not saying that these resources are regenerative, but they're less off-putting, and they'll at least give you a solid financial foundation if you're still feeling like you don't have a good basis in personal finance, or if you're struggling with debt and don't know how to get out of it. The Financial Diet, the one in the top middle, is a website and a YouTube channel. Chelsea, who runs it, is super progressive. You know, so I think her voice would be well received by people in this group. Ride Free Fearless Money, she is a lesbian punk personal finance person. Hadassah Damien, great stuff that she does. Socially Conscious Fire Facebook group. So this is a Facebook group for people that are interested in that financial independence, retire early, but want to do it in a socially conscious way and have discussions about that. Women's Personal Finance is a Facebook group, but it is only for people that are identified as women. It's not regenerative, but it's such a supportive environment and a safe space to ask questions that you might be embarrassed to otherwise ask about money. I mentioned Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin. I think this is such a great book to begin with, such an essential read. And another really good one is Early Retirement Extreme. Just two great books to start thinking differently about money and designing your life in our capitalist system. And then a little bit more, you know, in terms of what I have available. I have a full video course on regenerative wealth building that goes much deeper into the multiple forms of capital, starting to recognize stocks and flows more clearly, thinking about more about regenerative assets and asset classes. So those are some resources I can offer. And then these are pay what you can classes, both of them. The Towards Regenerative Investing, you know, I talked about all the work I did to learn about what investing opportunities are available to here in the US. We call us non-accredited investors. And I put that into this course. It is best suited for US audiences. Most of the investments are, I think you have to be based in the US to live in. So just make that disclaimer. And then there's, you can follow me on social media. I've just started a YouTube channel, although so far I've only uploaded some of my TikToks, and I do offer green living and money and lifestyle coaching around all of this if anyone's ever interested. And I see we have a few people who joined us. I don't know if we want to do this, but I did have one discussion question, and we can leave it for just people to take with them, or we can discuss it a little bit. This idea of, does the way, if you assess yourself now, does the way you earn, spend, invest, and manage your money reflect your values?
Well, the question I'd love to ask is for everyone in the chat just to share what was the most important thing you got from this? What was the thing that stood out to you that was most useful, helpful as a presenter to even hear these things? Like, what are people getting from it? What really landed? What was most inspiring, practical, most important for you? And Laura, as they're doing that, just thank you so much. My gosh, all the stories, particularly towards the end, I just had story after story that were so beautiful and inspiring. Yeah, so I hope people will check you out. So it's richandresilientliving.com is your website, yes?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So there we go. We can see her on YouTube. She's on all the socials. So if you want to follow her there, please do. Yeah, I focus on this marketing side, but I don't focus on the kind of wealth, the money, the rest of it. But boy, so much alignment. One thing that jumped out for me, you're talking about extractive economies, and it struck me that there's a kind of community pool of trust that happens where somebody says, hey, you want to go for lunch? You think, well, somebody invited me out for lunch. Why not? That sounds great. Because there's a sort of shared trust and goodwill that we have for each other. And when people market in ways that extract that trust, so they say, oh, hey, yeah, come for lunch, and suddenly they're in a pitch for Amway or something, it breaks the trust. And now you've extracted that trust, but you haven't put anything back in. And what that leads to, of course, is nobody wants to go for lunch with anybody. Nobody wants to go to your intro workshop because they're so convinced they'll be pitched. We've depleted the topsoil of trust so deeply. And it's not only you benefit from it in the immediate term, but long term, it costs you because there's less trust for everybody, and it costs everybody else. It costs everybody else in your industry and everyone else to come after, because now they're going to have to deal with depleted soil and be baffled because they didn't do anything wrong. I heard a dating coach. He was at a bar and he saw a couple of women, and one of them he thought was really beautiful, and he went up and the woman just barely looked at him and just gave him the finger. And he walked away, but he said, that wasn't me. It's like, I'm clear. That wasn't me. It wasn't my vibe. It wasn't how I was approaching. It was the last 20 guys that had approached her. That's what I was facing. And so when we act in an extractive way around trust and we don't put anything back, these are the consequences. And we're bearing the consequences, frankly, of the people who did extractive marketing before us. That's why we meet the suspicion that we didn't create, not from us. So anyways, that was something that just really resonated with me.
That's such a great observation.
Yeah. And then Michael said, thank you for all the resources and ideas, your modeling. I'm looking forward to being with the final question, right? How does the way I earn, spend, invest, and manage my money reflect my values? Boy, yeah, it's a beautiful question to meditate on. Now, Laura, you're also doing 2 more presentations coming up. The next one, I think, is the how to survive late stage capitalism.
Yep.
And do you want to just tell us maybe a bit about what's in that wasn't in this one?
Sure. So it's strategies to survive late stage capitalism. It's not so much focused on building wealth, but more just there are tidbits of some of this, how to a little more on how do we operate without money to circumvent the capitalist economy? How do we step up and recognize, just the things we can do just even with information and together, like working together, mutual aid type conversation. But there are 7 specific strategies that I'll share around navigating and maintaining our integrity, in the midst of late stage capitalism.
And then lifestyle design for anti-capitalists. What can people expect in that one?
So that is a look into that question that we started with, what does a wealthy life look like to you? So how can we work in ways that keep our regenerative wealth mindset or pursuits in mind and design our lives to be super wealthy in the way we want them to be, again, outside of the capitalist way of making us think we need to live.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Laura, I'm going to email you after I've got some resources and some thoughts for you. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. And Laura, I'll be putting this up on YouTube as well, so it can be seen more widely. And probably once all three of them are done, I'll probably email my list with all three of them to introduce you properly to my folks. It's beautiful what you're doing. I just feel such a kinship with you and your work, and it's such a beautiful synergy, with what I do. I was involved with a group, Bali, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, years ago, and have been involved in local efforts around that. And now I've really shifted and focused mostly on the marketing, but that's certainly been part of my background, everything you're talking about. So amazing, wonderful. Thank you. Stephanie also put in a comment, and Jean too. Stephanie says, refreshing to be reminded that resources are all around us. Yes. And Jean said, in terms of what was the most resonant concept for me, I'm still processing. I've been craving information like this, and frankly, my mind is blown by all the new terms and resources you shared. Such a big thank you. Well, yeah, you'll be able to watch this again, Jean. And again, there's 2 more sessions coming up to dig into this more. Maria said, yeah, thank you so much, Laura. I look forward to seeing your resources. I did a PDC years ago and need to apply the principles to my business. Yeah, I love that you're doing this for people, for entrepreneurs and people to think about not just a garden, but their lives, their business, their household. How do we take these things and apply it to our daily? It's great.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tad. I'm so excited that you all are excited about this conversation, because I love to have this conversation with people.
Yes, and something that would be very helpful too is if everyone in the membership, you can cut and paste whatever you posted, and if you go and in the membership on this event, in the comments, give a little bit of hype, because that'll help next time when Laura comes back to get even more people out, and because everyone who said they were coming will be notified of that. So feel free to give her a little of in the membership, a little bit of a shout out. That would be appreciated on my end, and I'm sure by Laura as well. So we'll leave it there. This will go up on YouTube in the coming days, and of course it'll be up in the membership as well. So feel free to check it out. And Laura, I look forward to talking with you in a month.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.